And welcome to the Prescribing Prosperity Podcast with your hosts, John and Alex Soutsos. Gentlemen, good to be with you again.
Hello again, Bill.
Nice to be here, Bill.
No, it's really nice because this is part two of a conversation that anybody who caught part one is going to be around for this part as well, focusing largely on the impact of the elections, what it might mean, what it could mean, maybe even what it should mean to Canada and its tax policies and, possible economic policies. It was a really robust discussion. That discussion, of course, spearheaded, if you will, by Kim G.C. Moody. He's founder and director of Moodys Private Client, one of Canada's largest and most premier tax law and accounting firms. And for me, listening to it, it was interesting to hear what needs to be done. I kept thinking in the course of that conversation, I don't think any of this is going to be done, but I don't know. I don't know because, candidly, as everyone who listens to this podcast knows, I'm the American on the podcast. So
it's okay. You're an honorary Canadian, Bill.
Well, thank you. I'll take that. As a matter of fact, I will take that. Okay. I'm sure that there are other people who would not be happy with that designation by you, Alex. So without further ado, let's continue the conversation. And I'll give it back over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much, Bill, for opening it up there and helping us transition back into the discussion. We left it off, obviously the tax discussion is very nuanced and there's a lot of stuff that we could get into. And I did just want to quickly get Kim's take on some of the proposed or potential changes that we could see from a tax perspective in the next 2 to 4 years implemented by the Trudeau government. So, Kim, we've heard at various points in time, whether it was actually announced or, sorry, excuse me, I said the Trudeau government. This was a bit of a Freudian slip on my part. It should be the Carney government. I got to correct my thinking that it's going to be the same. So in terms of different policies that might be coming in, Kim, one of the things that we've talked about and one of the things that we've seen is potentially the reintroduction of the capital gains increase, the carbon tax, the wealth tax, and the home equity tax. Can you quickly touch upon whether any or all of or multiple of those might be reintroduced at some point in the next 2 to 4 years?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And nice to be here again. Nice to see you, John. So I wrote a piece about this probably about a month ago or 3 weeks ago when it looked like the Liberals might get back in. So I wanted to remind readers as to some of the things that the Liberal Party, not necessarily Mark Carney, but the Liberal Party has been associated with, and arguably Mark Carney as well, given the fact, as you mentioned in the previous episode, that he's been an economic advisor to the Liberal Party for some time. So I think all the things that you mentioned, which were in the article that I wrote, are possibilities. Having said that, I want to think that, given some of the stuff that's been said by Mr. Carney and that they won't reintroduce any of this stuff, but the spending objectives are massive, and if you don't plan on making spending cuts in order to facilitate those spending goals, well, there's only one way to pay for them: either increase taxes or increase debt, or both. And it appears to me to be probably both. And so the things that they flirted with in the past, capital gains, which of course he canceled the capital gains inclusion rate increase when he got appointed prime minister. We'll see if that carries through. The carbon tax he suspended, and to make that very technical, the legislation on the consumer carbon tax has not been repealed. All they did was do an order in council, which is allowed by the legislation vis-a-vis regulation, to allow for that rate to go from whatever it was down to zero. And the income tax law and tax laws in general are filled with those opportunities. And so he was able to bring it down to zero by an order in council signed by the Governor General a few days after he made the announcement. And so will that legislation be repealed? We'll see. I tend to have my suspicions on that. And so a wealth tax. I've written about this a fair amount of times. The Prime Minister's office has flirted with the idea, along with the Privy Council, on the idea of introducing a wealth tax. And the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, the advocacy body, actually did a Freedom of Information request about this issue, and they released the documents that they got from the government on this. And most of it was redacted, but I still have it sitting on my computer, and I look at it routinely in terms of some of the information that they were looking at. And there was pretty specific stuff they were looking at in 2022, which is not that long ago, 2021, 2022. And there's some characters in there that I know very well that are very left of center economists that are advocating for this. And given the fact that it's basically the same people at the table, it wouldn't surprise me to see them flirt with that again. So those things, home equity tax is another one. I wrote about that last summer and wrote about it again recently. Prime Minister Trudeau flirted with this so-called think tank, which I don't think is much of a think tank, more than an advocacy body.
Policy alternatives? That think tank?
Not that one. This one is called Generation Squeeze.
Oh,
Which is kind of a ridiculous name, but headed by a real left of center academic professor who knows nothing about tax and is advocating for a home equity tax. And
which would be devastating to so many Canadians who rely on their real estate as a portion of their retirement
absolutely
funding. And so to do something like that would be tantamount to swallowing a poison pill for any government.
Oh, absolutely. And their proposal was that if you had equity over $1 million, which is not hard to get in the bigger centers like Toronto, Vancouver, especially if you've held your property for a long time, it was an annual tax, and I can't remember the rate. I want to say it was 2% in that range, or was it 3%? Anyhow, whatever it was material. And they did have this particular so-called think tank on their website. They've since removed it because of criticisms by me and others. They said that it's offensive that older Canadians who have been watching TV and eating popcorn or whatever. Certainly they said watching TV. I can't remember if they said the popcorn.
I think it's eating potato chips, they said.
Oh, it might have been potato chips, yeah.
but can't eat just one.
And so they've since removed that offensive comment. But that just shows you the characters behind it. Like no thought, no policy, just, hey, we need to go after this group of Canadians in order to fund spending by the government.
The irrationality of that, of even that concept, is unfathomable. So that essentially they're saying whatever your property taxes are right now that you're paying to the municipality, we're going to double them, and we're going to collect the other half. And so there are already a whole bunch of Canadians who successfully purchased a home decades ago and living in it and can barely scrape enough money to pay their property taxes and utilities. And now they would be asked to, hey, pony up an equivalent amount to give to us at the federal government. Talking about policies that would make this country cease to exist, that would be one of those policies. The real estate market is already in desperate shape in this country, and you would have a flood of houses hitting the market, and real estate prices would just collapse. So it is completely irrational.
And I think the average Canadian, I don't care which side of the political spectrum you're on, but in particular, the very radical left would think it's a good idea, but the average Canadian would not. But the problem is these kinds of ideas get fed oxygen when you have, in this case, Prime Minister Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland, go and attend their conferences and openly talk about it. It's like, don't do that, because you're adding oxygen to stuff.
You know what's incredible to me, Kim, is that we actually had somebody who was on our distribution list recently reach out to us and say they chose to unsubscribe because they didn't like speculative commentary, and I didn't respond to them, but I wanted to say
on that subject.
Yeah, on this very specific subject, and I didn't respond to them, but I wanted to say it's actually not speculative. There's documentation of the government considering this. This is not, me pie in the sky pulling stuff out of thin air. This has actually been considered by the government. And so to say that it's speculative and they don't want to hear about it is just burying your head in the sand, because it is a real potential threat. So
Yeah, and even if there was nothing there, there's nothing wrong with speculation, especially if you're using your experience and education and wisdom to speculate. If you don't want to hear that, then that's fine, I guess. So
anyway, to each their own. So let's transition then towards what's going on right now in Alberta. And one of the things that has been a hot button topic is the Alberta separatist movement. And I think one of the discussion points in the recent weeks since the election has been around whether or not Mark Carney can unify this country. And as those words were coming out of everybody's mouth, immediately following that was the ramping up of discussions about Alberta potentially considering a referendum on separation. So first of all, what are your thoughts on whether or not Mark Carney's government will be able to unify this country?
well, whether would have been Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre, there's going to need to be some unification efforts made, right? Because Alberta has been really treated like the ugly duckling for quite a long time, but in particular the last 10 years under this Liberal government. So politics aside, whoever the prime minister is of the day, in my view, really needs to make unification efforts. And so I wrote about this in my newsletter last week and said that Mark Carney has a hell of an opportunity ahead of him here. If he wants to have a legacy to be a unifying prime minister, forget about tax policy, forget about any fiscal issues, but if he wants to have a legacy as a unifying prime minister, this is the way to do it, right? Is to reach out to Alberta and make legitimate efforts, not the, hey, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. That kind of approach, pat on the head. No. It's gone way past that. And so I think he's got a hell of an opportunity ahead of him. Whether or not he can do it, I have my doubts because I'm not a big Mr. Carney fan. I just don't think he's got it in him. But I really hope I'm wrong because the country needs unification.
I was just going to say I've been listening to Danielle Smith's speeches, and for people out there who say, John, you have nothing better to do than listen to politicians speak. This is the way you get around filtered media: is you actually listen to the speeches and you draw your own conclusions. So I think Danielle Smith's speeches were quite eloquent and thoughtful. And what she said is, we don't want to go down this path, but you're forcing us to take a serious look at it. And we need some cooperation on your part from the federal government. And then through various forms of media, you hear that there's going to be a referendum this year. So can you please clarify, Kim, for us, what actually is the case in Alberta? Is there going to be a referendum?
I don't know the answer to that, but if I was a betting man, I would suspect there might be. But to your point, John, I really like that. Unfiltered. I mean, our media in Canada is, in general, very, very biased. And if you want some unbiased stuff, then go to it directly. And so I commend you for doing that. I've done the same thing. And I listened to Danielle Smith's speech. I can't remember what date it was on, April 30th or something like that. And I posted on my LinkedIn account and on my X account that this was one of the best political speeches I have heard in a long, long time. I mean, it was compelling. It looked at all sides of the equation. And if you were able to take your partisan hat off and just listen to, hey, what is she trying to say here? It was really well done.
She was very objective. She was not trying to sway people in one direction or another. She was objective and very rational in her approach.
Who she's trying to sway is Mark Carney.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
of
did, and
course.
I thought she did a really good job of that. I mean, not that I'm a big fan of certain, you know, loudmouths like Arlene Dickinson and Jan Arden, who have gone, used their platforms to criticize Danielle Smith and praise Mark Carney. That to me, that kind of partisan stuff needs to be put aside. What we need, in my view, is to look at, can we look at unifying Canada? And that's where I think Mark Carney has a great opportunity here, to reach out to Danielle Smith. And I know they've chatted, but it needs to be much more than chatter. There needs to be legitimate efforts made.
I don't think people outside of Alberta fully comprehend the extent of the frustration that Albertans have been feeling, not just in the last 10 years, but since 1980,
1980s.
with Pierre Trudeau as the prime minister. Alberta has been overtly discriminated against, and they have been penalized financially. People's standards of living have been diminished because of these liberal policies in the 80s and now in the last decade. And as a Canadian, even as someone living here in Ontario, when you think about it, that the Bill 69 that does not allow resources to come out of the ground, I just don't understand that. That is incomprehensible. That is, it's economic suicide.
Yes. Well, hold on. Let's let Kim peel back the onion here a little bit, and just for those people who are not so nuanced on the subject, Bill 69 is a good starting point. But can you please explain to our audience, Kim, why Albertans feel so marginalized and why the subject of separation has become such a popular discussion point out west?
Sure. I mean, and this is why I think history is always a good starting point, right? Because history provides roadmaps and great lessons. And I'll go back to the 1980s, but frankly, the frustration goes back even a lot further than that. But the most obvious is the 1980s, when Pierre Trudeau, so obviously Dad, introduced the National Energy Program. By the way, you can really tell what side of the political spectrum people are on when they talk about Fort McMurray and the oil sands. As soon as they say tar sands, you know that they're lefties, right? As soon as you say oil sands, you know that they're moderate. But tar sands has turned into a very pejorative term, and so yeah, it's derogatory. And so in any event, that's just a quick aside. But I grew up as a youngster in Fort McMurray, and I saw firsthand the devastation, people losing their houses because all of a sudden oil and gas jobs were gone, and high interest rates. And Alberta was absolutely devastated. And it was only when Prime Minister Mulroney came in and canceled the National Energy Program that we were able to start a long period of recovery. Fast forward to to the last 10 years, and you have all these attacks, either directly or indirectly, on Alberta. The plastics ban, the emissions cap, the bill, the so-called no pipelines bill, and it just goes on and on and on. But those are the obvious ones, and it's like, hey, we're trying to contribute to Canada here. We're trying to be successful. Yes, we're blessed with natural resources, but let us contribute to this great confederation of Canada. But instead, it's roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, all in the idea of ideology. And so that's the frustration that filters down, to certainly the majority of Albertans. You're always going to find, people like Jan Arden and Arlene Dickinson who just, don't understand and don't agree. But
they've got enough money that they're above it, and so those various policies don't impact them in a material way. At least in Arlene Dickinson's case, I'm not sure what Jan Arden's financial portfolio looks like, but I suspect it is of a similar stature.
Alexander, for the audience members who don't know who Arlene Dickinson is, do you want to elaborate?
I think a large portion of our audience would know her. She's from Dragon's Den, or would be most notable to Canadians from Dragon's Den is one of the venture capitalists who invests in various small business startups in order to give them seed capital to grow and then potentially get a substantial rate of return out of it. But going back to
very wealthy individual.
yes, one of the economic and financial elite of the country. And so for somebody of that stature, when you have that much wealth, the various policies that are enacted against the province don't impact you in a material way because you've already accumulated your wealth, and so you can really survive any marginal hits. But going back to the comments or some of the issues that the Albertans have, it also I think stems from some of the outsized payments that Alberta is making, because even in spite of all of the policies that have been put against the Alberta or the oil and gas industry, Alberta has still managed to prosper and thrive on an aggregated basis. Not as much as they could have under a more free and fair system, but they have still managed to be prosperous and thrived in a way that has not happened in other provinces of the country. And as a result, they pay a disproportionate amount into all of the social welfare benefits that Canadians get to enjoy, for lack of a better term, like the Canada Pension Plan, and the healthcare and wealth redistribution that exists amongst the various provinces. And so that's another understandable source of frustration amongst the Albertans. Am I wrong, Kim?
For sure. Oh, for sure. I can't remember the exact number, but it's billions and billions that Alberta has contributed to the equalization program, which in my view is an outdated model that needs certainly revisiting. And it has long been required to revisit. When former Finance Minister Bill Morneau renewed the equalization agreements, I think that was back in 2021 or 22, there was significant frustration within a lot of Albertans. Here's kind of the point. When you get the average Albertan who gets frustrated to the point of flirting with the idea that separation might be the way to go, that's dangerous. That's dangerous for our country, right? Whereas I can tell you, when I grew up, even with the National Energy Program, the idea of separation was considered very, very radical, and you're kind of a crazy. Even when Preston Manning started, the Western Canada Concept, I think it was, or which grew into the Reform Party, he was considered rather radical in the early days. Well, it became more, when they dropped, the separation idea and went into more reform, Triple E Senate, that kind of idea which came out of Alberta, then it was a little more moderate. But this whole idea of separation has been considered to be kind of nutty in Alberta for a long time. I can tell you, it's not so nutty anymore. It's much more moderate, and even in my friends and colleagues and associates, the idea talking about separation is not nutty, and so it's a dangerous time right now for that kind of thing. If we as a country want to stay together.
I was just going to say it's a reflection of the last 10 years of quote unquote leadership or lack thereof, that Canada has become, the society has become this divided in this country. And there are other provinces who are talking about this. Kim, have you heard anything out of Saskatchewan and Manitoba?
I haven't heard much from Manitoba, but certainly Saskatchewan, yes. Is it as mainstream in Saskatchewan as it's becoming in Alberta? I don't know the answer to that, but I suspect it's becoming that way.
So these are serious topics. We went to the voting booth and we voted for a divisive political party. And this is the frustrating part. Did we get a change in government? I don't think we did.
And not to mention the fact that they advertised on the platform that it was the Party for Canada, and it was we are going to be the unifying party and fight the external threat. And And what may turn out to be the reality is that, we just swallowed a grenade that could potentially fracture the Confederation. If you talk about Alberta starts to leave, then, you mentioned Saskatchewan is potentially considering something similar. Quebec has been itching to get out for decades now. You start to pull at these various threads, and all of a sudden, the whole discussion about Canada may become a lot more serious as to whether or not we continue to exist in our current form. And that's a very serious discussion that I don't think a lot of people are paying enough attention to.
Oh, I totally agree. And to the point that to the point where it's becoming more moderate and mainstream in Alberta, like I say, I'll repeat myself here. It's dangerous, right? Because if the objective is to keep Canada together, which I'm a proud Canadian, I studied Canadian history. I overloaded on Canadian history courses in my undergrad, overloaded on Canadian political science courses, just because I was fascinated by Canada and this great country that I was born in, and I loved it. And I still do. And I'm proud Canadian. I don't want to be separated from Canada. I think what Pierre Poilievre said the other day is apropos, which is, he doesn't support the idea of separation, but he can understand the frustrations of Albertans. I for me personally, I understand the frustration of Albertans because I am an Albertan. But do I support separation? I'm on the fence right now, which I can tell you, a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, it would be an emphatic no way. For a guy like me, who I consider myself to be fairly moderate, to be on the fence is shocking. And there's a lot of Kim Moodys out there that are on the fence.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. So, some of the commentary that's come from the detractors, I wanted to get your perspective on it, Kim. So let's say, for example, that Alberta would be made the decision that, what, we want out, and that came to fruition. Do you think some of the issues that have been mentioned by the detractors would become an issue? Things like, being a landlocked country, administering administrative costs and taxation to handle a smaller country and have the same administrative overhead, and just that financial burden being spread over a smaller number of individuals. Do you think there's any credence to that, or do you think that a lot of the commentary from the detractors is unfounded?
Well, let me answer that in a roundabout way, and then I'll come back specifically. So I posted this commentary on my LinkedIn account for anybody that wants to take a look at it. But there's two Liberal Party people elected in Alberta. One of them is in Calgary, in Calgary Confederation, that riding, and it's a new rookie MP. And for some reason, he decided to weigh in on Western separation in the last few days, and he wrote a piece on his LinkedIn account, and it basically went something like this: a separation is like, all these things will be bad if you separate, and so some of the things you mentioned, and so I looked at that and I thought, first of all, it's low intelligence stuff, right? To write something like that. And I don't have a lot of time for low intelligence stuff. And second, is the analogy I posted on my LinkedIn account went something like this. It was, okay, if we compare Canada to a husband-wife scenario, and let's say, and this is going to sound terrible, but let's say the husband is beating the wife consistently. And somehow, but besides just physical abuse, there's mental abuse, and there's a whole bunch of abuse going on. If the argument is that a divorce is going to be worse than the marriage, then I guess the argument is you're going to stay in the marriage. The wife would stay in the marriage. Well, I think that's absolutely atrocious. I mean, that's a silly argument. And I think it's a comparable to what's happening here. When you have a province of Alberta that's being abused in a whole bunch of different ways, you're going to make the argument that a divorce is not the right answer because it's going to be worse than the current abuse. That makes no sense to me. And so, but that's the arguments that are out there. And so I find those arguments silly and frankly non-productive. The other things that we often hear in Alberta, especially from your province and from Atlantic Canada, is, oh, grow up and stop whining. Yeah, okay, great. That's really helpful.
That's a good solution, huh?
Yeah, that's a great, stop whining. Or the other one I hear is, oh, just separate already. Yeah, that's a great one too. Yeah. How about instead of those kinds of responses being, the divorce is worse, stop whining, and just separate already, which encompasses most of the detractors. There's other ones as well, which I'll comment in a minute.
Mostly juvenile commentary.
Those are juvenile commentary and not helpful, because the real answer, frankly, is, okay, so like a husband and wife that has marriage problems, let's look at what's going on. What are the solutions? What can we do to make this a better relationship? The premise is we want the relationship to start. And I think most Albertans do. There's certainly a small group that say, no, we're done. Let's get out. I think those are not the norm. And so that's the issue in my view, is can we have a unifying government that can come and look at those elements and actually deal with the issues?
Yeah. So, let's, and you're right. You're absolutely right. Because, some of the commentary out there, and I did read that article that you're referencing, and it was nonsensical, moral concerns, just kind of a vague term that was thrown out, that there are moral concerns about Alberta leaving. What are the moral concerns? Oh, I don't know. They're moral concerns. It's bad. Okay. Well, like you said, if you're in a marriage or you're in a situation where you're being abused and you think the morality of divorce is bad, so you should stay and continue to get abused, is that a better solution?
I don't understand why people who live outside of the province of Alberta don't comprehend what Albertans have been dealing with, because as you noted, Kim, people were losing houses, they're losing businesses, they're losing their livelihood. Can you imagine if an Ontario government came in and cut back the healthcare industry and the education industry by 50%, and then Albertans said to people in Ontario, oh, what are you complaining about? Well, stop whining.
Yeah.
Government can't afford you. Okay, just get over it, get past it. Meanwhile, half the province would lose their houses and their livelihood. So it's a very insensitive for non-Albertans to be making such comments when they haven't lived the financial pain that the Albertans have.
Yeah, and I mentioned that in my LinkedIn post the other day about about that silly article that rookie MP wrote. I mean, the empathy level is zero, and I think outsiders, if you want to call them that, need to really try to put the empathy hat on. Okay, well, where there's a lot of smoke, there usually is fire. So why? Let's figure this out.
So let's use we're sticking with the marriage analogy here. You are the marriage counselor, Kim. What can Canada and Alberta do to try and reconcile? What do you think needs to be done in order to maintain Confederation in its current form?
Well, I think it goes back to what I've said already, which is there needs to be genuine discussions with genuine actions taken. Like, for example, the No Pipelines Bill, Bill C-69. I mean, that is such a destructive piece of legislation. And it doesn't just harm Albertans, although it does. It harms all of Canada. And so I can tell you right now that if Prime Minister Carney was to, revise that bill, or even better, get rid of it, that would go a long way to at least saying, hey, we've got an olive branch here. Now, that's just step one. I mean, we've got to look at the emissions cap and, the plastics ban, and there's bunch of other things, but those things would go a long way to pacifying the immediate concerns of Alberta. The more longer term things would be looking at how Albertans fit within Confederation in total. The whole idea that, we have Atlantic Canada that has more seats or disproportionate seats as compared to Alberta is ridiculous. The whole idea that, the election is pretty much over once the announcements are, the seat counts are done in Ontario, that needs a revisit. And so those kinds of things are more longer term, but we need to look at the Senate as well. I love the idea of an elected Senate. It's long been studied, and these patronage appointments to the Senate by the Liberals, not good, right? It's not good for the overall country. So yeah, and so there's things like that are more longer term, but the immediate stuff would go a long way to pacifying what I call the slow burn. When you have the slow burn of separation that grows to the point where moderates are even talking about it, that's a problem.
Yeah, it's a big red flag. And I think the point you made on the Senate is very well founded. Setting aside partisanship, anytime you rely on an appointed Senate as opposed to a democratically elected Senate, you end up with some very, I don't even know what the right way of phrasing that is.
Authoritarian
Stale
government.
Yeah, well, yes, that's a very politically charged way of
Here's the
describing
rule.
it.
Here are the rules. Rubber stamp it. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
exactly, and it's a very stale way of governing because it doesn't take into it. People don't actually have a true say. One of the great things that I think people don't understand about the United States political system is how often it gives people the opportunity to exercise their voice and say, whether or not they agree with the current direction that the government is going in.
Why are you holding up those evil Americans as a model?
Oh my goodness, I know I'm going to be booted out of the country tomorrow. Oh darn.
The checks and balances are impressive, right?
Yes. Midterm elections being one of them.
Yeah. And not to say that everything in the United States is perfect, because I'm not trying to suggest that, but those checks and balances are absolutely an important component in order to have a truly democratic society. People need to exercise their voice and keep government in check. An unfettered government that has too much power is always going to behave in an irrational and corruptible fashion.
The Senate is supposed to be the chamber of sober second thought, and it hasn't been that in a very long time.
I agree. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm sure you know from a high level that Alberta has elected its senators. We've had elections for senators for years and years and years. Now, the unfortunate part is the senators that got elected have been ignored by Trudeau. And unfortunately, the appointment of ideological senators as opposed to the elected people that Albertans elected get ignored. So that again, that's a small contributor to the frustration, but it adds, right? It adds to the slow burn and to the pile.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And just finally, before we bring Bill back in to wrap it up, Kim, I'll ask you one last question, which is, if this were to happen, do you think Alberta could succeed from an economic standpoint as an independent entity?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And the whole, if you read that rookie Liberal MP's stuff, where he tries to say that all these reasons won't, that's nonsense. And there's lots of European examples where there's landlocked countries and they succeed. So am I saying it's going to be easy and without challenges? Of course not. It's going to be challenging. But I don't think the average Albertan wants to go down that. We'd much rather stay within Canada with a Canada that works.
The thing that a lot of Canadians don't realize, that if Alberta were to become a separate country and we lose their transfer payments, guess what happens to the tax rate for the rest of Canada? Yep. Yeah. it skyrockets even more than, at that point, then Canada will certainly cease to exist because all the wealth creators will leave, as they've already been doing the last decade. But they whoever's left is just going to
just
abandon
stop
ship.
whining, John. Stop whining.
well, Kim, if it comes to that, I'll just leave and I'll come move in next door to you. So let me know if you see any for sale signs.
I want a Chinook. Can we have some Chinooks from Alberta? It's just too damn cold here in the winter.
I love our Chinooks, although for it does cause some people some migraines. Thankfully, not me, but they're nice warm winds.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Bill, we'll turn it back to you to land this plane and get us home.
Yeah, at the risk of courting controversy, I'm fascinated by the talk about secession on the part of Alberta, because if it were to happen, it would be historic, number one. But number two, you just don't hear this kind of talk much in the world anymore. And listening to Kim lay the groundwork for why this is such a serious issue within Alberta convinces me that it's either going to do one of two things. One, it will result in separatism, or two, and I add that I hope this is the alternative, it creates a serious conversation, because there are issues here that you've been talking about that deserve to be heard and discussed and have a huge impact on Canada. So it's a fascinating topic. So for people who are listening to this podcast, we'll wrap it up in our usual way. Those who are not clients or who not subscribers and not familiar with you, John and Alex, if they want to have a conversation with you or just reach out and make a comment, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best way for them to get in touch with us is to visit our website at medwealth.ca. That's med-wealth.ca. All of our contact info is on there, and they can reach out to us and we can schedule an appointment to meet with them.
Including our phone number.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. Then do it. This is a fascinating podcast. And for those of you who are not subscribers, hit follow, become a subscriber. That way, every time they drop a new episode, you'll be alerted and you can listen to it. And I would ask you, if you like it, tell people about it. Spread the word about what they're talking about on this podcast. Let people know, recommend it to them, because word of mouth promotion is absolutely invaluable, and we thank you for it in advance. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of John, Alex, and everybody at MedWealth, thank you for taking the time to listen. Catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to Prescribing Prosperity. Visit our website at med-wealth.ca. That's med-wealth.ca for more information or to connect with us for a consultation. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and their guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of IPC Securities Corporation. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investment advice. Always seek the advice of a qualified and licensed financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment or retirement planning. MedWealth Financial Services can provide a private consultation to help you determine the suitability of any guidance discussed on the show.